Hey guys, tonight we're stepping into a time when the walls were thick enough to stop an arrow. The nights were colder than you'd like, and the corridors echoed with the clink of boots and the hiss of torches. You're about to spend a full day and night inside a medieval castle, and yes, you probably won't survive this, but we'll pretend you do. Imagine the smell of wood smoke drifting through narrow stone halls, the damp chill rising from the flagstones under your bare feet, and the ever-present hum of life tucked away behind fortress walls. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And I'd love it if you'd post in the comments where you're listening from and what time it is for you right now. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're standing just inside the castle gate. The wooden drawbridge, still damp from last night's mist, stretches behind you, like a tired arm reaching across the moat. Its chains creak faintly as the morning air begins to stir, and somewhere high above you, hear the muffled call of a guard greeting the next shift. The portcullis is lowered now, a heavy lattice of oak and iron that makes you feel both safe and trapped at once. The main courtyard stretches ahead. Cobblestones here are uneven, slick with dew, and littered with little piles of straw, where a horse or mule has rested. To your right, a stable hand is brushing down a chestnut mare, its breath steaming in the cool air. The smell is thick hay, dung the faint sourness of fermented grain mash stored for feed. It's not unpleasant exactly, just alive. Above the keep towers, the great heart of the castle. Its stonework looks eternal from here, but you know every block was quarried, hauled and set by human hands, each one wearing the scrape and sweat of the masons who shaped them. A spiral of pigeons lifts from the battlements, as if they've been startled by some movement you can't see. As you cross toward the inner door, your boots catch on the gaps between stones. In places, moss has made a thin green skin over the rock, slick underfoot. A serving woman hurries past you with a wicker basket, the pale fabric of her apron fluttering behind her. Inside the basket, you catch a glimpse of loaves wrapped in cloth and a few round lumps of hard cheese. Breakfast for the household is underway. The door to the great hall is heavy oak iron-bound, the kind of door that could hold back more than a few angry visitors. It opens reluctantly, groaning like it resents being woken. Inside warmth rolls out in a slow wave. It's not cozy warmth, not yet, but compared to the crisp bite of the courtyard air, it feels almost luxurious. The great hall is vast, high-roofed, dim in the corners where the firelight doesn't reach. The smell of smoke hangs thick under the rafters, darkening them to a deep mahogany. A central hearth burns steadily, its flames licking around split logs, the embers beneath glowing like garnets. Benches line the long trestle tables, and a few early risers sit hunched over trenchers of coarse bread. Tankards clink softly as they lift and set them down. On the far side, a tapestry hangs a fading scene of knights on horseback, lances, tilted their shields painted with heraldic beasts. The fabric smells faintly of lanolin, stubborn after all these years. It muffles the chill of the wall behind it, though you suspect the wall would happily leach all your body heat if you leaned against it for long. You're ushered to a place at the table. The bread is dense, still faintly warm from the bakehouse, though the crust could chip a tooth if you're careless. A servant ladles you a wooden bowl of pottage, a thin, earthy stew of barley root vegetables and whatever meat scraps survived yesterday. It's not bad, just honest. Food here is meant to keep you upright, not delight your senses. The chatter is muted. No loud boasts or raucous laughter this early. You hear low conversations about the weather, the state of the outer wall, the coming delivery of salt fish from the coast. Somewhere behind you, a dog shakes itself, collar jingling, before curling back near the hearth. After you eat, you wander toward the kitchen passage. It's narrow, the air growing warmer and more fragrant with every step. Here the stone underfoot is worn smooth, centuries of scullery maids and cooks rushing from oven to hall. A boy darts past you with a basket of eggs tucked under one arm. His other hand steadies the load, while his bare feet slap the floor. The kitchen itself is a cave of activity. Great blackened cauldrons hang over open hearths. The walls are scored with soot. The smell is heady onions, sweating and fat fresh bread cooling on racks, and the sharper tang of herbs hung in bundles from the rafters. Outside a side door, you glimpse the kitchen yard, a cluster of sheds, a well, a chicken run. Geese strut with ridiculous dignity, muttering to each other. The well's bucket creaks on its rope, dripping as a maid hauls it hand over hand. Water splashes into a waiting tub, sending up a cool, salt, mineral smell that cuts through the warmer scents of cooking. Back in the kitchen, a spit slowly turns over the fire today, just a haunch of mutton. The cook, a broad-shouldered woman with arms like carved oak, keeps one eye on it while pounding herbs in a mortar. She glances at you without breaking rhythm, nods once, and goes back to work. Past the kitchen, the service corridors twist upward. You find yourself on a narrow stair spiraling toward the solar, the lord and lady's private chamber. Here the air changes again, less smoke, more beeswax, and rush-sweetened air. Tapestries soften the walls, and the small windows are glazed, a luxury rare in these parts. The solar is hushed. A carved chair stands by the window, draped with a fur. On the table nearby sits a psalter, its illuminated pages glimmering faintly in the weak light. Outside the courtyard bustles faintly below. From this height you can see the rhythm of the place guards, walking the walls, kitchen boys, crossing with baskets, the stable yard alive with movement. The day is beginning in earnest, and you are inside the slow, grinding heartbeat of castle life. The stone, the smoke, the footsteps on worn stairs. They all seem eternal here, and yet they move in a rhythm that could lull you into forgetting there is any world beyond these walls at all. From the solar, you follow another stair that coils even higher into the keep, each step narrower and more worn. The stone is cold under your palm as you steady yourself against the wall, and the faint smell of lime mortar lingers where the air grows still. You emerge into a small chamber. Beneath the battlements, a guard room. Here the air tastes different, sharper, salted, faintly, by winds that have traveled across open fields and rivers. Two guards sit hunched over a board game, rough-hewn pieces, arranged on a scratched table between them. One looks up, briefly, nods, then returns his attention to the game. Their cloaks are draped over the backs of chairs, the wool heavy and smelling faintly of wet dog and campfire. Leaning out one of the narrow arrow slits, you glimpse the world beyond the castle walls. Fields stretch away in patchwork, some freshly turned, others left fallow and freckled with wildflowers. Here and there, smoke rises from chimneys in the village beyond the moat. You notice the outer bailey below a smaller yard lined with sheds and workshops, the armorers, the Fletchers, the Coopers. You decide to descend and wander there. The stair twists down again, passing storerooms lined with barrels and sacks. The air here is cooler, still heavy with the earthy scent of grain and the faint tang of salt meat hanging from hooks. In one corner, a rat scurries behind a stack of crates, its nails ticking softly on the stone. The outer bailey feels busier than the inner court tradesmen at work, apprentices fetching tools, the clang of a hammer on anvil ringing like a distant bell. You pause at the smithy. The heat rolls out at you in a thick wave, carrying the metallic tang of worked iron. Sparks leap as the blacksmith strikes his hammer, shaping a horseshoe on the anvil's face. Beside him, the apprentice works the bellows, each exhale feeding the fire until it glows white at its heart. Next to the smithy, the Fletcher's workshop is quieter but no less purposeful. Bundles of goose feathers lie on the bench, waiting to be trimmed and glued to arrow shafts. The smell here is lighter wood shavings resin the faint musk of feathers. A boy with nimble fingers works a knife carefully along the grain of a shaft, shaving it true. You drift on passing the cooper's shed. Here, half-finished barrels are scattered about their staves, bound loosely with temporary hoops. The cooper works with a curved knife shaping the inner faces of the staves, so they'll fit snug when the permanent hoops are set. The sound is rhythmic scrape, pause, scrape. The smell of oak shavings curls in the air. Beyond the workshops lies a corner of the bailey devoted to storage. Here stand great stacks of firewood neatly split and stacked against the coming winter. Nearby, a few carts wait under rough awnings, their wheels crusted with mud from the last supply run. A stray cat prowls between them, tail flicking eyes fixed on something you can't see. You wander toward the postern gate, the smaller, less imposing exit set into the castle's curtain wall. It's barred now, but through the narrow opening, you catch a glimpse of the moat's dark water. A faint ripple travels across its surface, stirred by something beneath. Somewhere out there, the swans the Lord keeps in his moat might be gliding in lazy arcs, though you can't quite spot them from here. Returning toward the inner ward, you pass under an arch where the stone stays damp no matter the weather. Moss clings to the shaded mortar, and tiny ferns have rooted in the cracks. The air smells faintly of wet stone and earth. From here, a passage leads back toward the keep, but you pause at a small door on your right. Inside is the chapel, a hushed, vaulted space no bigger than a cottage's main room. Light filters in through narrow lancet windows, pooling on the flagstones. The altar is simple, a linen cloth, a carved crucifix, a pair of beeswax candles whose scent lingers faintly in the cool air. A book of hours lies open on a stand, its pages edged with gilt that catches the light when you tilt your head. You stand for a moment in the quiet, the sounds of the bailey muted to a dull thrum beyond the thick walls. Somewhere in the rafters, a pigeon coos softly. The air is cool and still enough that you can hear the faint scratch of your own sleeve as you shift your weight. Leaving the chapel, you follow the sound of voices toward the hall again. It's later now, and the place is livelier. A group of servants are clearing away the remains of the morning meal, stacking trenchers, and wiping the tables with rough linen cloths. The fire burns brighter logs added to keep the chill at bay as the day stretches on. A steward crosses the hall with a bundle of parchments under his arm. He pauses to speak with a guard captain, unrolling one sheet to point out something with a finger. Their voices are low but brisk talk of supplies, of when the next delivery of grain might arrive before the roads become impassable with autumn rains. You slip out into the side passage that leads toward the buttery and pantry. The buttery holds casks of ale and wine, the air cool and faintly sweet. The cooper's mark is stamped into the wood of each cask, and faint chalk notes show when each was last tapped. The pantry beside it smells of dried herbs and grain, with the faint edge of smoked meat lingering in the corners. From here, a narrow stair leads down into the undercroft, the storage chambers beneath the keep. Down here, the air changes entirely. It's colder, heavier, carrying the mineral smell of the earth. The ceiling is low in places, supported by thick stone pillars. Shelves of jars and crocks line the walls, preserved fruit, salted fish, pickled vegetables. In the darkest corner, a few wheels of cheese rest under cloth, maturing in the still air. A single candle sputters in its iron holder, casting long shadows that sway with the flame. Somewhere in the distance, a drip echoes slow and steady. The space is timeless here. No bustle, no clatter, just the steady silence of stored things waiting for their turn. Climbing back toward the daylight, you emerge once more into the quieter parts of the keep. Through a high, narrow window, you see the sun edging upward, casting pale light over the courtyard. The shadows of the battlements cut neat shapes across the cobblestones, and for a moment, the air feels almost warm. You hear the faint sound of a lute from somewhere above, perhaps one of the Lord's minstrels practicing for the evening's entertainment. The notes drift down the stairwell, in no hurry at all, each one falling into the next, like drops into a still pool. A serving girl passes with a basket of apples, their skins blushed red and gold. As she goes, the scent of them follows crisp sweet, a reminder that even within these stone walls, the rhythm of the seasons still finds its way in. And so the day unfolds inside the castle, a pattern of work and rest, of trade and quiet, all moving to the slow heartbeat of walls built to outlast the men and women who walk them. You follow the faint sound of that lute, letting it lead you upward through the keep's spiraling stairs. The steps are narrow, the wall curving close on one side, and the open shaft on the other, giving you a dizzying glimpse downward. Each turn feels the same, yet subtly different, a patch of worn stone here, a tiny window there spilling a wedge of pale light onto the steps. At last you emerge into a small chamber lined with carved wooden chests. A tall, thin man sits near the window with the lute balanced across his knee. He glances at you briefly before returning to his practice, fingers moving with patient precision over the strings. The music is not a performance, just the slow shaping of a melody, repeating phrases until they settle just right under his hands. From this high window, the view is wide, the tilled fields beyond the moat. The village roofs clustered like a spill of dice, the pale ribbon of the road unwinding toward the distant hills. Far away you catch sight of a lone rider, his cloak flicking behind him as he makes his way toward the castle. It will be some time before he reaches the gates. You wander onward, leaving the minstrel to his work, and step into the solar again. Now it is livelier. The lady of the castle sits near the hearth, her embroidery frame in front of her, a maidservant bent over the basket at her side, selecting skeins of thread. The air here smells faintly of lavender and beeswax. The windows are glazed with uneven glass that blurs the view of the sky, turning the clouds into soft shapes. A small hound sleeps curled at the lady's feet, twitching now and then, as if chasing something in a dream. Across the room, a nursemaid rocks a cradle slowly, the carved wood creaking faintly with each motion. The child within stirs, but does not wake his tiny fingers, curling around the edge of the blanket. Through another door, you find yourself in the wardrobe chamber. Here garments hang from pegs, wool gowns dyed in soft earth tones, surcoats trimmed with fur linen, shifts folded in neat stacks. The air smells faintly of cedar, a small attempt to deter the moths that would happily feast on these precious fabrics. Shoes rest in ordered rows, sturdy leather boots, lighter indoor slippers, and one pair of riding boots, still dusted with the pale chalk of the road. Servants move quietly here, one mending a tear in a sleeve, another brushing the nap of a cloak, with brisk, careful strokes. It is not bustle in the noisy sense, but a low hum of maintenance of keeping things ready for the next day, the next meal, the next ride out. From the wardrobe you pass into a narrow passage that leads to the guest chambers. The rooms here are modest but comfortable, a bed with a thick woolen coverlet, a chest for belongings, a small table set near the single window. The shutters stand open to the late morning light, letting in the scent of damp stone and the faint call of rooks from the trees beyond the walls. In one chamber, a pair of visiting squires are cleaning their gear. A helmet sits on the table, the metal catching the light in a bright gleam. A leather jerkin hangs from a peg, freshly oiled and smelling faintly of tallow. One of the boys hums as he works a tune as repetitive and steady as the work itself. You move on and find the passage turning sharply downward, taking you into the heart of the keep again. This time, you come upon the armory racks of spears lined in disciplined rows, shields hung neatly, their painted fronts dulled from long use. A suit of chainmail hangs from a stand, the interlinked rings draping like a heavy curtain. When you brush a hand over it, the cool metal shifts with a faint whispering sound. Against one wall, a barrel holds sheaves of arrows, the fletchings bright against the shadowed corners of the room. A rack of swords rests nearby, each one sheathed their hilts, wrapped in worn leather. A squire is here too, oiling a blade with deliberate care. He looks up, briefly nods, and goes back to his work. Past the armory, a small door opens onto the training yard. Here the air smells of churned earth and sweat. A few young men practice with wooden swords, the dull clack of wood on wood echoing between the walls. Their movements are not yet fluid, a little too eager, a little too stiff. But they persist, striking and parrying, breaking apart to reset and try again. At one end of the yard, a target of bundled straw stands propped against the wall. An archer draws and releases in a smooth motion, the arrow striking with a solid thud into the straw. Another follows, then another, each shot finding its mark with patient precision. From here you cross toward a small stable block tucked against the inner bustling. The air grows warm and full of the scent of horses' hay leather and the faint sweetness of oats. A groom moves among the stalls, murmuring softly as he checks hooves, straightens a blanket, and ladles water into a trough. A chestnut gelding leans over its stall door to investigate you, whiskers twitching against your sleeve. The far door of the stable opens onto a short lane leading back to the main courtyard. Here the sun is now higher, warming the stone enough that the damp patches are shrinking into irregular shapes. In the shade of the wall, a cluster of servants sit peeling vegetables into a basket, their conversation low and companionable. One old man sharpens a knife on a whetstone, the rasping sound steady and unhurried. Beside him, a boy holds a bowl of peeled carrots, their orange bright against the muted tones of stone and cloth. The rhythm of preparation is as much a part of castle life as the clang of the smith's hammer or the creak of the drawbridge chains. As the day slips toward noon, the smells from the kitchen grow stronger. You follow them back into the hall, where the trestle tables are being reset. Platters appear: roasted roots, loaves of fresh bread, a crock of butter pale and firm. The pottage from morning has been replaced by a heartier stew, its steam carrying the scent of meat and herbs. People file in guards, coming off their watch craftsmen from the Bailey servants, taking a moment to eat before returning to their duties. The sound grows, not raucous, but fuller, a layered murmur of voices, the occasional laugh, the steady scrape of spoons against wooden bowls. You take your place among them. The bread is warm this time, easier to break, the butter melting where it touches. The stew is thick and savory, with chunks of mutton and the sweetness of slow-cooked onions. A jug of ale is passed along the table, the liquid foaming softly as it sloshes into your cup. Somewhere in the hall, a dog barks once, sharp enough to turn a few heads, before settling again at the feet of his master. The fire pops and shifts, sending a brief cascade of sparks up the chimney. Overhead, the rafters hold the warm haze of the hearth smoke, curling slowly in the higher reaches, before slipping away through unseen vents. After the meal, the hall begins to thin again. People return to their work, to the long rhythm of the afternoon. The steward stands near the dais, speaking quietly with the lady, their heads bent close over a sheet of parchment. The minstrel has come down now, too, lute in hand, testing a few notes, as if deciding what tune might suit the evening. You step back into the courtyard, the sunlight stronger now, and take a slow breath. The air tastes faintly of wood smoke and roast meat, overlaid with the sharper tang of the smith's forge still working in the bailey. Somewhere above, the faint clatter of boots on the wall walk marks the passing of the watch, and the castle, steady and deliberate, moves on with its day. The warmth of the midday sun lingers in the courtyard, casting softer shadows now that the sun has climbed past its peak. The air hums faintly, with the sound of flies drifting lazily between stable and kitchen door, pausing at the baskets of vegetable peelings left for the pigs. You wander toward this kitchen yard again, the clatter of activity inside fading into a more measured pace as the cooks catch their breath after the midday meal. A girl tips a bucket of water over the flagstones, sweeping it across the worn surface with a broom made of bound twigs. The water finds its way into the grooves between stones, carrying away bits of peel and ash toward the drain. Beside the kitchen door, a row of herbs hangs in the sun: sage, rosemary, thyme, their leaves drying into crisp curls. The smell is strong in the warm air, drifting in waves whenever a breeze stirs the stems. A cook steps outside, wiping her hands on her apron, squinting at the sky, as if gauging whether the weather will hold. Beyond the yard, you take the narrow path that skirts the inside of the curtain wall. Here the stone is rougher under your fingers, and the occasional arrow slit gives you a brief framed glimpse of the world outside, a splash of green meadow, a stretch of dusty road, a glimpse of the slow-moving moat. The path leads to a postern stair, narrow, twisting upward inside the wall itself. You climb the air, cooling as the light dims, until you emerge onto the wall walk. The parapet rises to your shoulder, its top worn smooth by centuries of hands. The view here is broad and bright, the surrounding countryside spread in all directions. Guards pace slowly along the walk, their steps echoing softly in the stone channel between parapet and wall. One pauses to adjust his belt, another leans briefly over the wall to watch a cart approaching the main gate far below. They carry spears upright, the tips catching the sunlight in brief, sharp glints. You walk along the wall toward the northeast tower. Inside the stair coils downward into the cool shadow of the tower's base. Here you find the guardroom benches along the wall, a table strewn with dice and wooden cups, a rack of crossbows propped in the corner. A pot of stew simmers on the small hearth, filling the air with the smell of lentils and smoked pork. One guard nods toward you, then gestures to the stew with a half smile as if to say there's always enough for one more. But you move on, slipping out through the low arch into the outer bailey again. This part of the bailey is quieter now. The blacksmith hammers more slowly, shaping the final curve of a blade before setting it aside to cool. His apprentice sweeps the forge floor, pushing a drift of ash into a wooden bin. The cooper, too, is winding down, testing the fit of a hoop around a barrel before setting it gently aside for tomorrow's work. You pass by the Fletcher's workshop again and notice the smell of pitch heating on the small brazier, the glue for fletching arrows. The Fletcher dips a brush into the pot, his motion steady, precise. Each feather is pressed into place with the care of someone who knows a single careless move could waste hours of work. Back near the stable, the horses shift lazily in their stalls, some dozing, others nosing at their feed. The groom stands in the doorway, sharpening a hoof pick with short, efficient strokes. From somewhere nearby comes the faint bleating of goats kept for milk, their voices soft but insistent. The rhythm here is unhurried, yet purposeful. No one moves quickly unless there's cause. Every task is part of a long cycle repeating day after day. You can feel yourself falling into that cycle too, each step and sound measured, each breath steeped in the slow pace of castle life. You take a turn down a shaded corridor that leads back toward the keep. The air cools as you enter, and the scents shift from the sun-warmed hay and wood smoke of the bailey to the cooler mix of stone rush matting and faint candle wax. The great hall lies quiet for now, a few servants collecting cups and trenchers left behind after the meal. One woman sweeps the rushes toward a wicker basket, clearing the worst of the crumbs and debris. The fire still burns in the central hearth, though lower now, its embers glowing with the promise of easy rekindling later. Light from the high windows drifts down in pale bands, catching motes of dust that hang in the still air. Beyond the hall, you find yourself in the buttery again. The air here is a touch warmer, scented with the sweet tang of ale. A cask rests on its side, a tap wedged into its belly. The steward checks the chalk marks on its lid before making a note on a strip of parchment. His handwriting is careful, measured, as though each mark must stand for more than it appears. From the buttery, you follow the short corridor into the pantry. A boy stands on tiptoe to reach a shelf, retrieving a crock of dried beans. The clink, as he sets it down, is the loudest sound in the room. Another servant folds cloths over baskets of bread, ready to store them until the evening meal. You linger here only briefly before heading upward, again drawn toward the higher chambers of the keep. The solar is quieter now. The lady's embroidery sits folded on the chair arm, the threads tucked neatly into their pouch. The nursemaid has taken the child from the cradle, and the hound has stretched into a long, sighing sprawl across the hearthrug. Through the window, the late afternoon light is softening, turning the clouds to pale gold. You lean on the sill for a moment, watching the village beyond. Thin trails of smoke curl from the chimneys, the scent too faint to reach you, but easy to imagine peat wood, the first hints of cooking fires for the evening meal. The minstrel is here now too, speaking quietly with the lady. His lute rests across his knees, and he plucks a single note now and then as they talk, perhaps discussing what songs would please the household later. The sound is delicate, like drops falling into a still pond. Leaving the solar, you pass along a narrow gallery that overlooks the hall. From here, you can see the servants moving about far below, hear the faint clink of pottery, the muted thump of a bench being shifted. The space is vast, but contained a world within walls, self-sustaining, quietly alive. A door at the gallery's end leads to another stair, and curiosity takes you upward again. The air grows cooler, the light dimmer, until you emerge into the tower's upper chamber. Here the view is unhindered, the surrounding land stretching far into the hazy distance. The breeze is stronger up here, carrying the scent of grass and river water. A lone guard stands at the parapet, leaning on his spear. He does not move much, only shifting his weight from time to time. His eyes scan the horizon with the patient focus of someone used to long hours of stillness. Below the fields glow faintly under the waning afternoon sun, and the moat lies still as dark glass. The quiet here is deep, only the occasional creak of wood or faint cry of a distant bird to break it. You stand for a time beside the guard, sharing the silence, until the lengthening shadows draw you back toward the stair. Down again into the keep's embrace. The stones hold the day's warmth in a muted way, breathing it back into the air as the sun edges lower. Somewhere below, you hear the faint call to gather for the evening's preparations, the slow turning of the castle toward night. The afternoon light has thinned to a softer gold, now the kind that lies low along the walls and turns every edge to a warm glow. The long shadows of the battlements stripe the courtyard, and the air has shifted, still warm from the day, but with a subtle hint of coolness threading through it. You step back into the main courtyard, where the rhythm of the day has slowed to a deliberate pace. The smith's hammer is silent now. His forge banked its glow, fading under a layer of ash. The Fletcher has set aside his tools, the unfinished bundle of arrow shafts stacked neatly on his bench. Even the stable yard feels quieter. A few horses stand with one hind leg cocked in easy rest tails, flicking lazily against the last flies of the day. From the kitchens drifts the smell of evening preparations, roasted fowl. This time the scent of fat, crisping over open flames, mingling with the earthier aroma of onions and root vegetables. Somewhere a pot of broth simmers steadily, sending out slow curls of steam that mingle with the smoke hanging above the chimney. You wander toward the service passage beside the great hall. A servant passes you carrying an armful of rushes for the floor. The fresh bundles smell faintly of meadow grass and riverbank mud. She lays them out along the edges of the hall, spreading them in a thin, even layer to mask the day's debris and keep the stone floors from becoming too slippery underfoot. Near the dais, a young boy polishes the silver goblets, one by one, his small hands working a soft cloth in slow, careful circles. The goblets catch the fading light and hold it in trembling reflections. Beside him, another servant checks the table linens, smoothing out wrinkles with the flat of her palm before draping them over the trestle boards. At the far end of the hall, the fire has been coaxed back to life, flames licking up the fresh logs. The sound is a soft, low crackle, occasionally punctuated by the pop of sap. Its warmth spreads slowly, pushing back the growing coolness of the evening air. You slip through the side door toward the buttery, where the steward oversees the evening's drink. Casks are tapped the first trickles of ale, and wine tested for clarity. He makes quick notations on a parchment ledger, his quill scratching softly in the stillness. A small lantern hangs nearby, casting a warm circle of light across the casks and the steward's bent head. In the pantry, the air smells of baked bread still faintly warm from the ovens. Loaves are stacked in baskets lined with linen, their crusts dark and hard. A crock of butter rests beside them, the pale surface scored with the marks of the paddle. Dried herbs hang from the beams overhead, their leaves rustling faintly whenever someone passes beneath them. You follow the corridor back toward the hall, passing a servant girl, carrying a tray of trenchers stacked like shallow wooden plates. She balances them easily, her steps quick, but not hurried. From somewhere deeper in the kitchens, you hear the faint laughter of the scullery maids, a rare moment of levity in the workday. The courtyard outside is changing too. A groom carries buckets of water from the well, his steps steady the water sloshing softly with each pace. Two guards cross toward the outer gate, one shouldering a bundle of fresh torches. They pause to speak with the watch captain before disappearing along the wall walk. You follow in their general direction, climbing the postern stair once more to the top of the wall. Up here, the breeze is cooler, carrying the scent of grass and the distant river. The guards are fitting the torches into their brackets along the parapet, striking flint to catch the first small flames. One by one, the orange points wink to life, chasing away the growing shadows along the wall's length. From this height, you can see the village beyond, beginning its own preparations for night. Wisps of smoke rise from chimneys, and small figures move between house and byre, settling animals for the evening. The lowing of cattle drifts faintly upward, mingling with the occasional bark of a dog. The sun is edging toward the horizon now, its light spilling in long streaks of red and amber across the land. The moat catches the colors in a rippled reflection, disturbed only by the slow glide of a pair of swans. You linger a moment at the parapet, feeling the stone still faintly warm beneath your hands. Descending again, you cross the bailey toward the chapel. Inside, the air is cooler and stiller, the last of the daylight filtering through the narrow windows in pale, slanted beams. A single beeswax candle flickers on the altar, its scent faint but comforting. A chaplain kneels in quiet prayer, his voice no more than a whisper in the stone-softened air. You don't linger long. The sounds of the hall are calling the low rise of voices, the scrape of benches being drawn into place. By the time you return, the trestle tables are fully laid, each place set with a trencher, a goblet, and a small knife. The fire is bright now, filling the hall with a gentle orange glow. Servants move steadily, carrying in platters of food. Roast capons glisten under their crisped skin. Bowls of root vegetables, their edges caramelized, release sweet, earthy scents. A tureen of thick pottage is placed near the dais, ready to be ladled into bowls. The air is rich now, full of warmth, and the layered smells of the evening meal. One by one, the household begins to gather. The Lord enters first, his cloak swept back, followed by the lady and their household guests. The guards file in next, some still shrugging off their cloaks, their boots sounding heavy against the rush-covered floor. Craftsmen from the bailey take their places further down the tables, their hands scrubbed clean, their faces flushed from the forge or workshop. The noise swells, still not raucous, but warmer, fuller. Tankards are filled, bread is broken, and the first platters are passed along the tables. Somewhere a dog whines softly, its nose twitching at the smells drifting past. The fire pops again, sending sparks briefly upward before they vanish into the chimney's dark throat. You find a place along one of the lower tables, the bench worn smooth by years of use. A servant ladles stew into your trencher, the steam curling upward in fragrant spirals. The first mouthful is rich and warming, the flavors deepened by the long, slow cooking. Beside it, a slice of bread soaks up the juices, the crust softening. As the meal settles into its steady rhythm, the minstrel steps forward. His lute catches the firelight as he begins to play the tune, winding easily through the hum of conversation. It is a soft, flowing melody, one that doesn't demand attention, but fills the spaces between words and clinks of cutlery. The torches along the walls cast their steady glow, their flames wavering just enough to make the shadows shift gently across the hall. The night is drawing in beyond the windows, but here in the heart of the castle there is only warmth and the slow unwinding of another day. You lean back slightly, the wooden bench solid beneath you, the sounds and scents wrapping you in their steady, ancient rhythm. Outside, the last rim of sunlight slips away, leaving the world to the watchful torches and the quiet vigilance of the walls. The meal moves in its unhurried fashion, platters passing back and forth, tankards being refilled, the warm drone of conversation rolling under the minstrel's steady playing. Here and there, someone laughs not loudly, but with the kind of warmth that comes from shared familiarity. A few stories are told at the upper table, punctuated by the lift of a goblet or the gentle rap of a hand against the wood to draw attention. You finish your trencher slowly, soaking up the last of the stew with the heel of your bread. Around you, others are doing the same, not hurried, but with the steady, measured pace of people who know the night is long and there is no need to rush toward it. The minstrel shifts into a slower tune, the notes lingering longer in the air before they fade. A pair of servants begin moving through the hall, collecting empty trenchers and stacking them in balanced piles against their hips. One sweeps the crumbs from the table into her hand, dropping them into a small bucket that will later go to the dogs or pigs. At the high table, the lord leans back slightly, speaking in low tones to the steward. The lady has set her embroidery aside for the evening, hands folded neatly in her lap as she listens to the music. The fire casts their faces in soft relief, flickering light, catching in the folds of their clothing, glinting on the rings at their fingers. As the meal winds down, the torches along the walls are trimmed, their flames coaxed to burn steady for the hours ahead. Outside the high windows, the darkness has thickened. Only the faint orange pinpricks of the wall torches mark the outer edges of the castle in the night. You rise and slip toward the side passage, the air cooler here, away from the hearth's heat. The buttery is quieter now, only a faint trickle of ale still being drawn, the casks set back into place for the night. In the pantry, the baskets are emptying cloths folded over the remaining loaves. Jars and crocks return to their shelves. A servant passes you carrying a lantern, the small flame throwing an oval of light ahead of her as she moves toward the stair. You follow the glow upward, passing into the gallery above the hall. From here, the sounds are muted, just the low hum of voices, the occasional laugh drifting upward. The air is faintly scented with wood smoke and the lingering aromas of the meal. Beyond the gallery, you find yourself in the solar again. The lady has retired here, joined by a few favored companions. They speak in soft voices, the fire in the small hearth casting a gentler light than the blaze in the great hall. The hound is curled in a tight ball beside her chair, chin tucked over his paws. A maid kneels by a chest, selecting a warm cloak for the lady's shoulders. The fabric is thick, and smells faintly of the cedar chest it came from. Outside the window, the night is absolute no moon yet, only the faint suggestion of the village lights far below and the dark ripple of the land beyond. You leave them to their quiet and take a narrow stair upward toward the tower. The steps are cool beneath your hand, the air thinning slightly as you climb. At the top, the guard's post is marked by a small brazier glowing in the corner, its heat a welcome pocket of comfort in the open air. The guard stands with his back to you, scanning the dark horizon. His spear rests against the parapet, one hand idly adjusting the strap of his cloak. Below the moat lies like a black ribbon reflecting the faintest glimmers of the wall torches. The countryside beyond is still the kind of stillness that seems to deepen the longer you look at it. You stand beside him for a time, sharing the quiet. Every so often, the faint creak of leather or the crackle from the brazier breaks the silence. A soft wind carries the smell of damp earth and distant wood smoke from the village. Somewhere far below, a dog barks once, then falls silent. Descending again, you pause at the chapel. Inside, a lone candle burns on the altar, its wax pooling slowly at the base. The chaplain is gone now. The bench is empty, but the air holds a quiet gravity, as though the stone remembers every whispered prayer. You sit for a moment on the cold bench, letting the stillness seep in the candle's flame, swaying faintly in the unseen drafts. When you return to the courtyard, the change is complete. The day's bustle has ebbed entirely. The outer bailey lies in deep shadow, the workshops closed, the forge silent. Only the steady glow of the stable lanterns marks where life still stirs, a horse shifting in its stall, the faint snort and shuffle of hooves on straw. You wander toward the well where a guard stands, filling a bucket for the last watch of the night. He nods as you pass the lantern beside him, lighting the stone lip of the well in a small circle of amber. The bucket's chain creaks softly as he hauls it up, water dripping in silver threads, back into the dark shaft. The kitchen is nearly quiet now. A scullion scrubs the last of the pots, the scrape of the brush steady and unhurried. A cook leans in the doorway to the yard, arms folded, watching the night, as though making certain it will behave until morning. The air smells faintly of cooling ashes and the ghost of roasted meat. In the great hall, the tables have been cleared entirely. The fire burns lower, the light dimming into a more intimate glow. A few people linger, a pair of guards sharing a quiet drink, the minstrel plucking a slow, wandering tune that might last until his fingers tire. You find a place near the hearth, the bench still faintly warm from the earlier press of bodies. The flames shift and settle shadows bending along the walls in time with the dance of the fire. Every so often, a log collapses inward, sending up a brief shower of sparks before settling again into its bed of embers. The hall breathes differently now, slower, deeper. You can feel it in your own body, your breaths matching its unhurried pace. Beyond the walls, the night is an unbroken sweep, but here within the keep, the air is wrapped in the safety of thick stone and the steady watch above. As you sit there, the weight of the day begins to settle into your bones, not as weariness, but as a kind of grounded stillness. The castle holds its own kind of lullaby. The creak of a chair, the distant shift of a guard's boots on stone, the soft murmur of a voice in a far-off room. It is a rhythm that will carry you through the hours ahead, steady as the walls themselves. The night outside has settled into its deepest shade, the moon still hidden beyond the far horizon. The air in the hall feels thicker now, not from heat, but from the slow, unbroken quiet that spreads like a blanket, over stone and timber alike. The last notes from the minstrel's lute fade into the stillness, and he sets the instrument gently in its case before slipping away toward the servants' quarters. Only the fire remains truly awake, its slow, measured breathing, casting a soft, flickering glow against the far walls. Each flare of the flames sends shadows stretching long and thin across the rush-covered floor. In the far corner, a dog lifts its head, yawns soundlessly, and curls again into its own warmth. You rise, drawn toward the outer door. The great oak is barred now, but the smaller side door creaks softly as you ease it open. Outside the courtyard is silvered faintly by starlight. The torches along the walls burn low, their flames smaller now, tended only enough to mark the boundaries of the keep. The air is cooler here with that crisp, almost metallic scent of stone that has been breathing in night air for hours. Your footsteps seem too loud as you cross the cobblestones. Somewhere in the shadows, a guard shifts his stance. You can just make out the dark line of his cloak against the lighter stone of the wall behind him. He nods once in recognition, the gesture slow, as if anything faster might shatter the quiet. The stable lanterns still burn a warm glow, spilling onto the straw just inside the doors. The horses stand in easy slumber tails, swaying now and then against the odd nightfly. A chestnut shifts and exhales the sound deep and soft before lowering its head again. The smell here is warm and sweet hay leather, and the animal musk that belongs wholly to a place like this. You leave the stable and head toward the postern stair, climbing until you reach the wall walk. Up here, the air feels wider, colder, touched by the faintest hint of dampness drifting from the moat below. The countryside beyond the walls is shadowed the shapes of hedgerows and copses, flattened into a single dark quilt under the stars. The guards on duty move sparingly, conserving their warmth in the still air. One leans on his spear eyes, scanning the horizon in slow arcs. Another tends a brazier, coaxing the coals to glow a little brighter before cupping his hands over them for warmth. You pause beside him, letting the heat brush your fingers. From here, the castle seems impossibly still. The village below has gone dark, save for a single lantern swinging faintly along the road, perhaps a late traveler returning home. The silence feels so deep, it seems to press gently against your ears. You follow the curve of the wall toward the northeast tower. Inside the stair spirals down into the cool hush of the guardroom. Here, two men sit at a table playing a slow game of dice. The soft clatter of the carved cubes on wood is the only sound in the room. A small oil lamp burns between them, its light pooling around their hands and the scattered coins they play for. You move on, drawn by the faint scent of smoke toward the kitchen's side passage. Even at this hour, a scullion is awake, stirring a small pot of porridge over the embers for the guards who will break their fast before dawn. The smell is simple oats and a pinch of salt, but warm enough to fill the small space. She hums softly to herself, her voice blending with the faint bubble of the pot. Past the kitchen, you slip into the outer bailey. It is nearly silent here. The workshops stand in shadow, their tools put away, their doors barred against the night. The only movement comes from a pair of cats winding between the barrels stacked against the cooper's shed. Their eyes catch the torchlight in quick, bright glints before they vanish into the darker corners. You wander toward the postern gate, still barred tight. Through its narrow viewing slit, the outside world is a wash of darkness, broken only by the faint glimmer of the moat. Somewhere beyond, An owl calls low, deliberate, answered by another farther off. The sound settles deep into the quiet, like a ripple spreading slowly across still water. Turning back, you make your way toward the chapel. Its heavy door groans slightly as you push it open. Inside, the candle on the altar still burns its light, pooling in a tight circle against the surrounding dimness. The air is cool, holding the faint tang of old incense. The silence here is thick, as though the stones themselves are resting in prayer. You sit for a time on one of the wooden benches, feeling the stillness gather around you. Somewhere in the rafters, a small winged shape shifts, perhaps a bat, disturbed by your presence. Its faint rustle fades quickly back into the dark above. When you leave the chapel, the courtyard feels even quieter, as though the air has settled while you were inside. You pass through the great hall once more. The fire has burned lower, a deep bed of embers glowing steadily at its heart. One of the night watch sits on a bench near the hearth, head bowed slightly, as if listening to the fire's faint crackle. Beyond the hall, you find the servants' quarters. The air here is warmer, thick with the mingled scents of wool blankets, straw mattresses, and the faint trace of cooking smoke that has drifted in from the day. Most are asleep already, bodies curled into their shared beds, the rise and fall of breath blending into a soft chorus. The narrow passage beyond leads to the wardrobe chamber, now empty. The garments hang silent and still, their folds catching the faintest gleam from the lantern at the door. You brush past them lightly, feeling the weight of wool and the soft texture of worn linen under your fingertips. Curiosity draws you upward again toward the Lord's private chambers. The solar is dark now, save for the faint glow from a single candle near the bed. A guard stands at this door, his posture straight despite the hour. Inside, the fire is nearly out. The logs collapsed into a pile of soft ash and half-hidden embers. You linger in the doorway, letting your eyes adjust to the low light. The stillness here is different, not the public quiet of the hall or courtyard, but the deeper, more guarded quiet of the household's innermost rooms. The air is scented faintly with lavender from the sachets tucked into the bedding. Leaving as quietly as you entered, you descend again toward the courtyard. The air is cooler now, the kind of chill that clings to your skin and makes your breath hang faintly in front of you. You cross slowly toward the wall's shadow, where the guard's brazier burns lower but still steady. Here you pause once more to look out over the sleeping land. Somewhere far off, a fox barks sharp and brief in the stillness. Then nothing, only the slow, even breathing of the castle itself, a soundless rhythm you can almost feel through the soles of your feet. It is the hour when time feels stretched, each moment longer than the one before. And yet the night is steady, unbroken, holding the castle safe in its grasp, until the first pale streaks of dawn begin to stir again. The castle lies deep in the quiet heart of the night. You can feel it in the stillness of the air, in the long, unbroken stretches, where even the guards make no sound. The fire in the great hall has sunk almost entirely into its bed of embers, each one glowing faintly in the dark, like tiny red eyes keeping watch. Beyond the walls, the land is shrouded in darkness. The village has long since gone to sleep, its small hearth fires banked to last until morning. The only light comes from the stars overhead and the pale wash of the Milky Way stretching from horizon to horizon. The moat reflects a narrow scatter of those stars, broken here and there by the slow movement of water, stirred by an unseen fish, or the gentle wake of a swan gliding silently in the dark. Somewhere along the wall walk, a guard coughs, once a short, muffled sound that fades almost as soon as it begins. His boots make a soft scuff as he shifts his stance, adjusting to the hour's growing chill. The small brazier beside him glows just enough to light the curve of his spear and the folds of his cloak. Inside the keep is hushed. The air is cooler now, touched by the dampness of stone that has been breathing the night for hours. In the servants' quarters, the breathing of the sleepers is slow and even. A faint rustle comes when someone shifts beneath a wool blanket, then settles again into stillness. The scent here is warm wool straw and the lingering ghost of yesterday's fires. In the wardrobe chamber, the cloaks and gowns hang, as if asleep themselves, folds of fabric, soft and unmoving in the dark. The cedar scent has deepened overnight, the air heavy with it. The hush here is so complete that even your own steps feel too loud against the stone. The chapel is much the same. The candle that burned through the night is now a low pool of wax, its flame small and unsteady. The scent of old incense hangs faintly in the cool air, and the pale outline of the altar seems to hover in the shadows. You can almost imagine the stone itself exhaling a quiet prayer. In the kitchen, a single figure is awake, the same scullion you saw before, now feeding a few sticks of wood to the banked embers in the hearth. The faint crackle of rekindling fire blends with the slow bubble of the porridge pot, left to cook gently through the dark hours. The smell is simple and comforting, a reminder that morning will come no matter how long the night feels. In the outer bailey, the workshops sleep under their own cloaks of shadow. The cooper's shed is silent, the barrels resting in neat rows like soldiers awaiting orders. The forge is cold, its anvil catching only the faintest starlight from the narrow gap under the door. Even the stable is still, save for the occasional soft snort or the shuffle of a hoof against straw. On the wall walk, the guards continue their slow pacing. The rhythm is measured, a few steps, a pause to scan the darkness, another few steps. Their cloaks shift in the breeze, the wool brushing faintly against the stone. The torches are low now, their flames barely lifting above the rim of their brackets, but still enough to keep the shadows from swallowing the parapet entirely. Then, faint, almost imperceptible at first, the deep black at the eastern horizon begins to thin. It is not yet light, but there's a suggestion of it, a softening in the darkness. The guards notice it, though they do not speak. The world beyond the walls has the slightest change in shape, the hedgerows and trees no longer swallowed completely by night. Inside, the change is slower to arrive. The air in the keep still feels wrapped in darkness. The scullion stirs the porridge with a slow, patient motion, the wooden spoon tracing the same path again and again. Somewhere above, a door opens quietly and closes again, the sound small but clear in the sleeping building. The first real signs of morning come in the changing of the watch. A pair of fresh-faced guards emerge from the barracks, their cloaks clasped, tight spears in hand. Their boots sound softly on the cobblestones as they make their way toward the postern stair. The men they relieve descend in slow steps, their faces lined with the fatigue of the night, hands reaching instinctively toward the thought of warm porridge waiting below. A little more of the eastern sky has begun to pale now. The moat holds the faintest reflection of it, a muted silver rather than black. The swans are more visible in the dim light, their shapes gliding slowly along the still water. Somewhere in the village, a rooster crows its call, thin with distance but carrying clearly in the morning air. In the stable, the first of the grooms stirs, pulling on his boots and pushing open the doors to the yard. The horses lift their heads, ears flicking toward him. He moves among them, murmuring low and soft, the words unimportant. It's the tone that matters. A bucket is drawn from the well, its chain squealing faintly on the pulley water, sloshing heavily inside as he carries it to the trough. Back in the kitchens, the cook has arrived. She sets down her basket of fresh herbs and bread, rolling her sleeves as she surveys the hearth. The small fire is coaxed into a brighter burn, the porridge checked and stirred. Bread dough from the cool pantry is brought out to rest closer to the warmth, its pale dome slowly rising in the early heat. The first servants begin to move through the corridors, their footsteps quick but not hurried. A girl carries a basket of clean linen toward the guest chambers, the fabric folded neatly and smelling faintly of sun from where it dried yesterday. Another heads toward the solar with a jug of fresh water, the surface trembling in the jug's mouth as she walks. The light in the courtyard is shifting now, still pale, but with a cool silver tone that outlines the shapes of the well, the stable, the stone steps leading up to the wall. The air is damp and fresh, carrying the smell of wet earth and the faint sweetness of the moat's still water. On the wall walk the guards stand in that in-between hour, the night behind them, the day not yet here. One leans over the parapet, watching the fields as the first streaks of pale gold begin to show between the far hills. The air changes with it, losing its edge of night's chill and gaining the faint promise of warmth. Inside the great hall is beginning to wake as well. A pair of servants sweep the rushes toward the door, clearing away the small debris left from the night. The embers in the hearth are stirred, sending up a faint plume of sparks that vanish almost immediately into the chimney's throat. A log is set carefully onto the glowing bed, catching slowly its surface, beginning to glow at the edges. The smell of baking bread starts to drift through the air, faint still, but enough to mark the true turning of the night into day. Somewhere deeper in the keep, a dog shakes himself awake, his collar bells jingling faintly in the quiet. The light keeps growing, though it feels gradual, a slow spill of silver into every corner of the courtyard, the bailey, the keep's shadowed halls. The castle is stirring, as it has for centuries, moving from the silence of night toward the work of another day. The pale silver light in the courtyard strengthens by degrees, softening the last of the shadows clinging to the walls. The damp sheen on the cobblestones catches the morning's first brightness, turning in places to small mirrors that wink briefly as you pass. The air feels new again, washed clean by the hours of darkness, and carries the mingled scents of fresh-drawn water, wood smoke, just beginning to curl from the chimneys, and the faint sweetness of baking bread. In the kitchens, the hearths are fully awake now. A young boy feeds split logs into the main fire, the flames leaping greedily along the dry grain. The cook stands at a wide table kneading bread dough with the practiced rhythm of someone who has done the same thing every morning for years. Her hands press and fold, the dough creaking softly under her palms. Beside her, another servant shapes smaller loaves, laying them on wooden boards dusted with flour. The warm, yeasty smell fills the room, hinting at the comfort of the first meal to come. On the smaller hearth, a pot of pottage bubbles quietly. Today's breakfast stew of barley leeks and bits of salted pork left from last night's supper. The scullion stirs it slowly, her spoon making a steady circle in the thickening broth. A bundle of fresh herbs lies nearby, ready to be dropped in for flavor. Through the open door to the kitchen yard, you see the first deliveries of the day arriving. A cart pulled by a stout gray mule rattles to a stop, its wheels still damp with dew. The driver climbs down, rubbing his hands together against the morning chill, and begins unloading sacks of flour and a small barrel of salted herring. Two boys from the pantry appear to help, their breath puffing in small clouds as they shoulder the loads indoors. The stable yard is stirring too. The grooms lead the horses out into the pale light, their coats steaming faintly in the cool air. Hooves clop softly on the stone as they're walked to the troughs where fresh water from the well gleams dark in the buckets. The smell of hay is strong here, blending with the grassy scent of the animals themselves. A colt in the far stall stamps playfully, earning a quiet word from the groom before being led to join the others. Along the curtain wall, the guards of the night watch make their slow way down the stairs, their spears held loosely, now their faces drawn with the fatigue of long hours. Fresh guards are already in place, scanning the fields in the growing light. The fields themselves have changed, since you last looked. No longer just a flat, dark quilt, but a pattern of pale green and gold, threaded with the silver glint of the river winding away toward the distant hills. In the outer bailey, the workshops are waking. The blacksmith pulls open the forge shutters, letting the light spill into the dark interior. He sets the first fire of the day, coaxing the coals to life with practiced blows of the bellows. The first strike of his hammer rings sharp against the morning air, echoing briefly before fading into the steady hum of the castle's waking life. The cooper checks the barrels he left unfinished the day before, running a hand along the curve of the staves to feel for gaps. The smell of oak shavings rises as he shaves another sliver from the inside edge, his knife whispering against the wood. The Fletcher works more quietly, trimming the split ends of goose feathers, aligning them with neat precision along the shafts laid out before him. The air in his workshop is still cool and smells of resin and fresh-cut wood. His fingers are deft, the work as much about rhythm as it is about speed. In the great hall, the rushes have been swept and replaced where needed, the floor ready to bear the day's comings and goings. The fire burns bright again, a welcoming heart in the wide space. A few guards take their breakfast here before heading to their posts, trenchers of bread piled with warm pottage goblets of ale to wash it down. They eat quietly, exchanging low words about the night's uneventful watch or the weather for the day ahead. Near the dais, the steward sits with his ledger open, scratching neat lines of script with his quill. He pauses now and then to check a tally or call a servant over for a brief word. The sound of the quill's tip against the parchment is a soft, steady counterpoint to the quiet murmur of voices. In the chapel, the chaplain lights fresh candles, their flames swaying gently as they take hold. The morning light slipping through the lancet windows paints pale shapes on the stone floor, shifting as the sun climbs. A faint scent of beeswax fills the small space, mingling with the lingering trace of incense from the night before. Outside in the small kitchen garden within the inner walls, a gardener bends over the beds, checking the young herbs for signs of frost or nibbling pests. The soil is dark and damp, the leaves catching beads of dew that glint in the light. A few early bees drift lazily between the flowering plants, unbothered by the slow movements of the man tending them. The outer gate remains shut for now, though the portcullis has been raised to let the morning light spill into the entry passage. The chains creak faintly with the shift of weight, and the heavy timbers of the gate itself bear the marks of long use, scratches, patches, and the smooth wear of countless hands. The guard at the gatehouse leans over to speak with the gate captain, their conversation drifting faintly into the courtyard before fading into the quiet. You wander back toward the kitchens as the first bell of the morning rings out. Its tone is clear and deep, carrying across the castle in a slow series of chimes. Servants quicken their pace slightly, some heading to the hall, others to the storerooms or the workshops. The castle has fully woken now. The day's work has begun. The breakfast in the hall is a simpler affair than the evening meal, but no less welcome. Bread, dark, crusty loaves, is sliced thick, the butter pale and cool beside it. Bowls of pottage are ladled out, the steam curling gently into the air. A crock of honey sits at one end of the table, its surface catching the light like amber. You take a place among the others, the bench worn smooth and warm from the press of bodies. The food is hearty, the bread soft inside its crust, the stew rich with the flavor of the pork and herbs. It's not eaten quickly, but steadily, spoons scraping softly against the wooden bowls. The talk is low, practical matters, plans for the day, small news passed along from the village. When the meal is finished, the bowls are collected, the tables wiped down, and the benches pushed back to the walls. The hall feels briefly empty again, though the fire's glow keeps it from seeming cold. You step outside into the courtyard once more. The sun is higher now, throwing light over the full spread of the castle stone, warmed to a pale gold banners, at the towers stirring gently in the breeze. The day has fully begun, the night's stillness stored away until the castle calls for it again. By the time the sun has cleared the higher points of the castle wall, the courtyard hums with a kind of quiet industry. It is not loud, not hurried, but every corner seems to have its own small rhythm at work. The air is still cool enough that the warmth from the stones underfoot feels pleasant, not yet pressing. The workshops in the outer bailey are fully awake. The blacksmith's hammer rings in a slow, deliberate pattern, shaping a length of iron into something useful, perhaps a hinge, perhaps a bridle bit. Each blow sends a quick burst of sparks, jumping away before they fade against the cool morning air. The forge glows a steady orange, the bellows wheezing softly as the apprentice feeds it air in measured pulls. The smell here is a strong metallic heat mixed with the faint tang of scorched leather. At the cooper's shed, curved oak staves lie stacked in neat bundles. The cooper fits them into place, tapping each one with a small mallet, so they nest tightly against their neighbors. The sound is rhythmic, almost musical in its repetition, tap, turn, tap. A small pile of shavings curls along the edge of the workbench, smelling faintly of fresh-cut wood and earth. The Fletcher's bench is littered with goose feathers, their white veins catching the light. He sits with his head bent close to his work, aligning the fletchings with careful precision before binding them in place with fine thread. The work is silent, but for the faint scrape of his knife against the arrow shafts, a sound that blends easily into the murmur of the bailey. In the kitchens, the ovens are hot again. The first loaves from the early batch are cooling on the wide wooden tables, their crusts crackling softly as they settle. A girl sweeps flour from the work surface, sending pale clouds into the air, where they hang briefly before drifting down. The cook ladles the last of the breakfast pottage into a smaller pot to keep warm for latecomers before turning her attention to the day's main meal. She moves between table and hearth chopping carrots and leeks for a thick midday stew. The knife's repeated thock against the board is steady, measured, never hurried. In a corner, a boy tends to a smaller fire under a cauldron, dropping in bundles of herbs tied neatly with twine. The scent blooms in the warm air, rosemary, thyme, and the sharper edge of parsley. The stable yard is a place of its own motion. A pair of grooms lead the horses out one at a time for brushing. The long strokes of the currycombs lift dust and loosened hair, the scent of warm hide and hay mingling in the sun. Hooves are checked shoes, tightened where needed. A messenger mounts a lean bay gelding, the animal shifting restlessly before settling into the familiar weight of rider and saddle. In the great hall, the steward moves between servants, his ledger in hand. He speaks in short, low sentences, sending one girl to fetch more candles from storage, another to the pantry for a jar of dried beans. The rushes are being changed in one corner, the older flattened mats swept into baskets to be burned later, replaced with fresh green ones that smell faintly of riverbanks. The chapel holds its own slower rhythm. The chaplain has finished the morning's prayers and now inspects the small repairs to be made: a loose bench leg, a candle sconce needing a fresh bracket. He hums faintly as he works the sound, blending with the muffled footsteps of a servant dusting the altar rail with a soft cloth. The guards drill in the training yard, wooden swords striking with a steady percussive rhythm. The blows are not hurried, each one measured, followed by a pause to correct stance or adjust footing. The clack of wood is sometimes joined by the thud of a shield catching a strike. Along one wall, a few men practice with the bow, their arrows thudding into the straw butts with a deep, satisfying sound. On the wall walk, the view is broad and bright now. The fields are fully awake, the villagers moving between house and field, their figures small but purposeful in the distance. Smoke from their chimneys drifts lazily upward, caught now and then by a light breeze. The moat shines under the sun, dotted with the calm shapes of the swans gliding slowly from one shadow to another. Inside the keep, smaller tasks continue quietly. In the wardrobe chamber, two women sort through garments needing mending, setting aside those to be brushed and aired in the sun. Their needles flash briefly in the light spilling from the small high windows. In a nearby room, a boy polishes a set of goblets, his cloth moving in slow, practiced circles. A faint scent of beeswax drifts from the gallery, where a servant is polishing the carved wood of the railing. Her strokes are slow, even, and the wood gleams under her careful work. In the corner, a small pile of rags waits to be washed later in the day. The buttery is quiet for now, its casks resting in their cool shadows. Only one is tapped, a thin trickle of ale filling a jug for the steward's table. The pantry smells of dried herbs, root vegetables, and a hint of the smoked fish stored in its coolest corner. As the sun climbs higher, the light in the courtyard grows warmer, chasing away the last traces of morning damp. Shadows shorten under the eaves, and the pale gold of the stone takes on a deeper hue. The pace remains steady, no rush, no sudden noise, but there is a quiet sense that all the gears of the day are now turning together. The blacksmith pauses to wipe his brow, leaning briefly on the handle of his hammer, before returning to the steady rhythm of shaping metal. The cooper tests a barrel by pouring a small ladle of water inside, listening closely for any telltale drips. The fletcher sets another finished arrow in the rack, his hand moving without hesitation to the next shaft waiting on the bench. In the stable, the messenger has returned. His horse is walked slowly to cool, the bridle loosened, and the saddle lifted away to reveal the dark, dampened patch of the animal's coat. The groom rubs it dry with long, sure strokes before leading it back to the stall. A pair of servants cross the courtyard carrying baskets of freshly laundered linen. The cloth folded neatly and smelling faintly of lavender water. They vanish into the keep's side door, their soft footfalls quickly swallowed by the stone corridors. Even the smallest corners of the castle are at work now. The scullery girls rinsing crockery at the water trough, the errand boys running messages between hall and bailey, the gardener carrying armfuls of herbs back from the kitchen garden. It is the mid-morning heartbeat of the castle, steady, unbroken, each person's task, a small thread woven into the larger, enduring fabric of the day. The sounds are many, but never loud. The ring of the forge, the murmur of voices, the quiet rush of water from the well, the flap of a banner in the wind. All of it folds into a background hum that feels as though it has been going on forever and will go on forevermore. The heat of midday begins to soften as the sun tips just past its highest point. The shadows are still short, but they have begun to stretch again, the edges of the courtyard showing thin slants of shade where the walls lean just far enough to shield the stone from the light. The air is warm, carrying the mingled scents of roasted meat, freshly baked bread, and the faint metallic tang from the blacksmith's forge that still glows faintly in the bailey. The midday meal is done. The hall has quieted the noise of clattering trenchers and low conversation replaced by the muted scrape of benches being pushed back into place. The trestle boards remain out, but most of the dishes have been cleared. Here and there, someone lingers over a cup of ale, speaking in the low tones of those with nowhere pressing to be. The fire burns steadily a little lower than in the morning, its embers shifting occasionally with a soft sigh. You step outside into the courtyard. The bright light presses on your eyes for a moment, and the warmth feels heavier than it did earlier. The outer bailey is quieter. Now the workshops are not silent, but the pace has slowed. The blacksmith quenches his latest piece in a trough with a loud hiss, setting it aside to cool before wiping his brow and leaning against the anvil for a moment's rest. The cooper turns a half-finished barrel, slowly checking his work with a critical eye, but even he seems to move with a touch less urgency than in the fresh hours of morning. A pair of stable boys lead 2 horses out to graze in a small walled paddock near the moat. The animals lower their heads at once, tearing at the grass with slow, steady bites. A groom sits on the paddock rail, watching them with a far-off gaze, his chin resting in one hand. The warm, grassy smell drifts on the light breeze, mingling with the sharper scent of sun-warmed stone. In the kitchen yard, a maid tips the contents of a bucket into the chicken run. The birds crowd around her feet, pecking eagerly at the scraps. Their clucks and occasional sharp squabbles break the quiet, though not for long. The geese in the nearby pen keep to the shade, their long necks bent toward their backs as they tuck in for the warmest hours. Within the keep, the corridors are dimmer, cooler. The thick walls hold the morning's coolness for longer, and the rushes on the floors muffle the sound of your steps. The buttery smells faintly of ale and beeswax polish. The pantry is tidied with baskets stacked neatly and jars aligned along the shelves. The air here is quiet, save for the occasional faint thump of a door closing somewhere in the distance. You wander to the solar. Here the lady sits by the window in a shaft of light, her embroidery stretched taut in its frame. A maid beside her reads aloud in a soft, even voice from a small, leather-bound book, the words flowing in a rhythm as steady as the needles rise and fall. The hound from earlier lies stretched on the cool rushes, his tail twitching now and then in his sleep. The air in the solar smells faintly of lavender and beeswax from the polished furniture. The glass in the windows is wavy, blurring the outlines of the village beyond, and turning the green of the fields into a watercolor softness. You lean for a moment against the window frame, watching the pale shimmer of the moat in the sunlight, and the slower movement of the people in the village as they, too, feel the weight of the warmest part of the day. Down in the great hall again, a few servants sweep the last crumbs from the floor into wicker baskets. The sound is soft, steady. The fire's heat is more noticeable now, and the servants move to open the shutters of the high windows, letting the warmer air drift lazily inside. The chapel is quiet as always, but the scent of beeswax and cool stone feels sharper after the warmth of the hall. A lone figure kneels in the front pew, head bowed, the folds of their cloak pooling silently around their feet. The filtered light from the lancet windows paints narrow stripes across the altar cloth, the gold thread in its embroidery catching the sun. In the outer bailey, the sounds are subdued. The clang of the forge is less frequent, the cooper's mallet slower in its strikes. The fletcher works in silence, tying and trimming fletchings without speaking to anyone. His hands move by habit, now muscle and memory guiding the work more than thought. You pass by the garden inside the walls. The sun beats down on the dark soil, the herbs drooping faintly in the heat, until the gardener comes with his wooden bucket, sprinkling the plants with a gentle rain that releases a sharper, greener fragrance into the air. Bees hum low among the flowers, their work unaffected by the warmth. The moat reflects the sun in bright, broken flashes. A pair of ducks paddle in the shadowed side beneath the wall, their soft quacking the only sound in that quiet stretch of water. The swans rest on the far bank, heads tucked back, white feathers turned ivory in the glare. Even the guards seem to move with less urgency in the heat. Those on the wall pause longer at each end of their patrol, leaning for a moment into the shadow of a merlon before continuing on. One or two share a brief word, their voices low, before turning back to their watch of the fields and road beyond. Inside the keep, the undercroft is the coolest place to be. The thick air here smells of stone old wood and the faint tang of stored grain. A few servants take the opportunity to work here, sorting jars and checking the linen-wrapped wheels of cheese. Their voices carry softly, in the low-ceilinged space, each sound dulled by the heavy air. In the kitchens, preparations for the evening meal are beginning slowly. The cook consults a basket of onions, choosing the firmest for slicing later. A girl plucks herbs from their stems, dropping them into a small bowl, while another cleans a pair of fish, her hands moving deftly, despite the smell that rises from the work. The heat from the hearth is bearable for now, but already a second scullion is fanning the flames to keep the logs burning evenly. The steady tick of the castle's early afternoon continues without rush. Nothing feels hurried yet, each task edges the day forward. The work has softened into that familiar lull between meals, between the sharper energies of morning and evening. If you stand still in the courtyard, you can hear it all layered together, the occasional clink of a hammer, the faint murmur of voices in a shaded corner, the flap of cloth from a drying line catching a stray gust, the distant ripple of water in the moat. It is the castle breathing in its warmest hours, the day holding itself in a slow, steady pause before it begins to tip toward evening. The warmth of the early afternoon begins to soften. The sun, still high but no longer fierce, tilts just enough to send longer fingers of shadow stretching across the courtyard. The air carries a faint shift, not cool yet, but touched with that subtle freshness that hints the day is beginning its slow turn toward evening. You hear it before you see it, the faint uptick in sound that marks the castle waking from its midday quiet. A cart rumbles through the outer gate, its wooden wheels thumping softly over the cobblestones as it's guided toward the kitchens. In the bed of the cart, sacks of grain sit alongside a small barrel of ale and a netted bundle of onions. The driver hops down, dusting his hands on his tunic, and exchanges a few words with the kitchen steward before untying the load. The workshops in the bailey, though never truly asleep, take on a livelier hum. The blacksmith works again at the anvil, hammering in short bursts between heating the iron. The ring of each blow is sharper now against the lengthening shadows. His apprentice has returned from fetching water, and the hiss of quenched metal rises again, a sound that lingers in the air before fading into the murmur of other work. The cooper trims the rim of a finished barrel with his curved knife, the shavings curling away to the ground in pale spirals. He runs his hands over the staves, nods to himself, and begins setting the iron hoops in place. The mallet taps with a crisp regularity, each strike tightening the barrel's shape. At the Fletcher's bench, shafts are stacked neatly to one side while feathers are cut and sorted to the other. His hands work in a quiet, repetitive rhythm, a small dab of glue, the press of feather to shaft the binding of thin cord. He works without looking up, as if the pattern of his craft is something that runs deeper than conscious thought. The stable yard has found its pace again, too. The grooms lead horses back from the paddock, brushing them quickly before checking straps and tack. One saddle is tightened with a practiced tug. A bridle is adjusted to sit just so. A messenger mounts up, leaning forward to speak briefly with the head groom, before nudging his horse into a steady trot toward the gate. In the kitchen yard, the air smells richer now. The cook stands at a chopping block, slicing onions in smooth, even strokes. The bite of them catches faintly in the air, blending with the earthier scent of carrots and leeks piled nearby. A scullion tends a small cauldron over the fire, stirring steadily as steam curls upward into the late afternoon light. Within the keep, servants move with more purpose. In the buttery jugs are filled and set aside for the evening meal. The steward checks the ledger, ticking off the day's deliveries and sending a boy to fetch another bundle of rushes for the hall floor. The pantry is busier too. Baskets are filled with loaves of bread wrapped in linen, and jars of dried fruit are brought down from the higher shelves. The solar holds a softer kind of activity. The lady, still seated by the window, has set aside her embroidery for a moment to speak quietly with a maid. A letter is being drafted on the small writing desk, the quill scratching faintly over the parchment. The hound at her feet shifts, stretching one paw lazily before settling again with a sigh. Down in the great hall, the fire has been coaxed into a brighter burn. Logs are set carefully on the embers, the flames licking higher as the air draws in from the newly opened shutters. A servant sweeps the rushes near the dais, while another polishes the long trestle tables with a soft cloth. The wood gleams faintly in the shifting firelight. The courtyard outside is touched with a warmer, deeper glow now. The banners at the towers stir in the evening breeze, their colors rippling softly against the sky. Guards walk the wall walk in slow, even patrols, their spears catching the light in sudden flashes. One pauses at the parapet to look out over the fields, the green dulled now to a dusky gold in the fading day. In the garden within the walls, the gardener makes his last rounds. He checks the tied bundles of herbs hanging to dry under the eaves, runs his fingers over the leaves to judge their readiness. The smell is strong here, sage, rosemary, thyme, each sharper now that the sun has eased. The moat lies still under the lengthening shadows, its surface a dark, rippling mirror. A pair of ducks cut gentle wakes across it, their shapes blurring in the reflected gold of the walls. On the far bank, a heron stands motionless, its long beak pointed toward the water, as it waits for the flash of a fish beneath. The sound of a bell carries faintly through the air, summoning workers from the bailey toward the keep. Their footsteps scrape softly on the stones, as they return, the blacksmith's apprentice wiping his hands on a rag, the cooper setting his tools aside in orderly rows, the fletcher placing his finished arrows into a rack before locking the door to his small workshop. In the kitchens, the air is thick now with the scent of roasting meat. Fat hisses in the drip pan, sending up little bursts of aroma that mingle with the sweeter smell of apples being baked in their skins near the edge of the hearth. A girl bastes a joint of mutton with careful strokes, the juices rolling down over the browned surface in glossy rivulets. The servants in the hall work quietly, but with intent. Candles are set into their holders along the walls, their small flames trembling as they're lit one by one. The evening's rushes are spread evenly across the floor, their fresh, grassy scent a pleasant counterpoint to the deeper smells of the meal being prepared. The trestle tables are set with trenchers, goblets, and small knives, each place laid with a precision that speaks to long practice. The light outside has taken on that rare in-between quality, not quite day, not quite night. The sky above the battlements glows with a muted gold that fades into a soft blue, the edges of clouds painted with fire by the setting sun. The air is easier now, cooler against your skin, carrying the faintest hint of night's approach. On the wall walk the guards watch as the day slips into its last hour of sunlight. The village below is slowing too, a few last figures moving between house and barn smoke, rising in lazy trails from the chimneys. The swans have drifted closer to the bank, near the mill stream, their white feathers muted in the shadowed water. The castle's heartbeat is a little quicker now than in the soft hours after midday. It is not hurried, but there's a quiet sense of readiness, that gentle gathering of energy before the evening's warmth of food fire and company takes hold again. You step back inside the cooler air of the hall wrapping around you. Somewhere a lute is being tuned, the soft plucked notes floating through the side passage toward the dais. The cook calls for a ladle of broth. The steward answers a question about the wine casks. Each small sound layers itself into the whole, the measured familiar music of a castle easing into the night. The afternoon sun leans westward now, casting longer shadows through the courtyard. The warmth is still there, but the edge of the heat has softened, making the air easier to breathe. Where earlier the stones shimmered under the midday glare, they now glow more evenly, as though they've settled into their own slower rhythm. You can feel it in the way the castle begins to rouse again. It's not abrupt, no bells ringing, or orders shouted, but a gradual tightening of motion. Servants appear in doorways, exchanging a few quiet words before moving along to their tasks. The stillness that wrapped the keep in the early afternoon is loosening, replaced by the hum of renewed work. In the outer bailey, the smith is back at his anvil. The hammer falls in deliberate strokes, each one ringing out against the cooling air. Between strikes, he leans to check the glowing edge of the blade he's been shaping all day. His apprentice tends the forge, pumping the bellows in smooth pulls, coaxing the heart of the fire into a brighter, hotter glow. The scent of hot iron is sharper now against the breeze. A few steps away, the cooper runs his hand around the curve of a half-finished barrel, nodding to himself. The metal hoops lie neatly stacked at his feet, ready to be hammered into place. When he begins, the sound is quick but precise. A short metallic ring, the creak of wood adjusting another ring. The Fletcher, working at his small bench, trims the end of a goose feather, aligning it against the smooth shaft of an arrow. His fingers move without hesitation. Dip, press, wind, the fine thread, a rhythm born of long repetition. The bundle of finished arrows in the rack beside him grows steadily, their fletchings fanning out like pale brushstrokes. In the stable yard, the late-day tasks are underway. A groom brushes down a gelding, long strokes lifting dust into the air, where it hangs golden in the sunlight, before drifting away. Hooves are checked water troughs refilled from the well. One horse tosses its head impatient for a feed bag. Another rests one hind leg drowsy despite the activity around it. From the kitchen yard comes the first stronger sense of the evening meal. A maid hauls a pail of peeled root vegetables to the chopping block. The scrape of her knife against the board, punctuating the easy conversation she keeps with another girl carrying a tray of herbs. The green fragrance of parsley and thyme drifts on the air, mixing with the earthier smell of onions and the faint sweetness of apples. Within the keep, the buttery is being readied. Casks are tapped jugs lined up along the counter in preparation for the evening's pour. The steward checks each one, making a note with his quill before passing along quiet instructions. In the pantry, baskets are filled with loaves wrapped in cloth, their crusts dark and firm. The dry smell of flour lingers in the air. The solar holds a more subdued energy. The lady has shifted to her writing desk, a quill poised over a sheet of parchment. A maid stands nearby, holding a small sand shaker, ready to seal the ink when the letter is done. Sunlight through the wavering glass panes makes the writing table glow softly, the edges of its carved legs dark against the floor. Down in the great hall, the preparations are more visible. The fire has been built up again, its flames reaching higher as fresh logs catch. Benches are shifted slightly to make room for longer tables. Rushes are brushed into a neater spread underfoot. Two boys carry in armfuls of candles, placing them into iron holders along the walls and on the tables themselves. The first few are lit, their warm points of light pushing back the shadows in the corners. The courtyard's light has deepened into a richer gold, now the banners stirring in a gentle wind that cools the air just enough to lift the hair at your temples. Guards move along the wall walk in slow patrols, pausing now and then to rest a hand on the stone parapet as they look out over the fields. Beyond the walls, the land itself is mellowing in the changing light, greens deepening toward dusk, the river flashing silver where it bends through the meadow. In the walled garden, the gardener makes his last rounds of the day. He checks the drying racks where bundles of sage and rosemary hang under the eaves, their leaves curling tightly now. The smell here is heady, the herbs releasing more of their fragrance in the cooler air. He pauses to pinch away a few wilted leaves before closing the small wooden gate behind him. The moat is quieter than before. A lone duck glides across the shaded water, leaving a thin wake that disappears before it reaches the bank. The swans rest in the far corner, their heads tucked under wings, their white feathers muted to ivory by the evening light. Back in the bailey, the blacksmith douses his forge for the day, steam rising in brief hissing clouds. The cooper sets aside his tools, wiping his hands on a rag. The fletcher stretches his back before carefully placing the day's finished arrows into storage. Each task is wound down with the same quiet care that began it. The kitchen's pace, however, is increasing. Roasting meat turns slowly on the spit, fat hissing as it drips into the pan below. A scullion bastes it with a ladle, the glossy surface darkening under her strokes. In a smaller pot, apples simmer with honey, the sweet scent curling up toward the beams. A boy carries in a jug of milk from the dairy, his bare feet soundless on the flagstones. The hall grows warmer, brighter. More candles are lit, the glow layering with the flicker from the hearth. A servant smooths the linens on the trestle tables. Another sets goblets in their places. The echo of footsteps softens as the rushes underfoot take more of the sound. From somewhere nearby comes the faint strum of a lute being tuned, a promise of music for the evening meal. Outside, the sky is in its brief hour of in-between color, still pale in places, but with streaks of amber and rose drifting above the dark line of the horizon. The breeze brings with it a hint of cooler night air, though the stones still hold the day's warmth. It is the hour when the castle is neither fully at work nor fully at rest, caught in the balance between day and night, between labor and leisure. Every sound seems gentler, more deliberate. The measured call of a guard at the gate, the soft clink of goblets being set in place, the murmur of voices in the kitchen yard. You find yourself moving a little slower, too, matching the castle's pace as it eases into evening. Somewhere high on the wall, a torch is lit, its flame catching with a small flare before steadying into a soft orange glow. Others will follow one by one until the perimeter shines with a quiet ring of light. In this moment, the day is still holding on, but night is already waiting at the edges. The castle breathes between them, ready to welcome the evening. The sun slides lower, brushing the tops of the battlements with its last soft gold. Torches along the wall walk catch the fading light for a moment, before the dusk begins to claim them. Their flames are still small, but already they send a gentle glow down the stone, licking across the mortar lines and casting a faint shimmer over the cobbles below. In the courtyard, servants move more quickly now, their quiet footsteps carrying purpose. A boy brings in a fresh bucket from the well water, sloshing softly over the rim. A girl hurries past with a tray of goblets, their polished surfaces catching the torchlight in brief sparks. The kitchen yard is alive with low voices, the scrape of knife on board, the thump of a heavy pot being set into place. Inside the keep, the hall is transformed. The fire roars in the central hearth, sending warmth into the high-timbered roof. Candles glow along the tables, and in the sconces, fixed to the stone walls, their light soft and golden. The rushes underfoot are freshly laid, their grassy scent mingling with the aromas wafting in from the kitchens, roasted meat, baked bread, the sweet edge of fruit cooked with honey. Along the trestle tables, trenchers are set neatly in place, each one a shallow round of bread or a wooden plate. Goblets wait beside them, catching the flicker of the fire. Small knives rest at the ready, their handles worn smooth from years of use. The dais at the far end gleams faintly, where the Lord's table is laid, with a little more care, finer goblets, a heavier cloth, the polished sheen of the great salt cellar at its center. From the buttery jugs of ale and wine are carried in set at intervals along the tables. In the pantry, baskets of bread wrapped in linen are being brought forward, their crusts still faintly warm. Servants slip between hall and kitchen, with quiet precision, each knowing the rhythm by heart. The great doors open to admit the first of the evening's diners. Guards, their shifts finished for the day, come in with the easy posture of men ready for food and rest. Craftsmen from the bailey arrive with sleeves rolled to the elbow, hands scrubbed clean. They take their places farther down the tables, exchanging nods and brief words with their neighbors. From a side stair, the household's guests begin to appear, cloaks draped back over their shoulders. They move toward the dais with polite bows or curtsies for the lady already seated there. Her gown catches the light from the fire, the embroidery in its folds shimmering with each step she shifts in her chair. The hound lies at her feet, tail thumping once as a favored servant passes. The lord enters last, a quiet ripple moving through the hall at his approach. He exchanges a few low words with the steward before taking his place at the center of the high table. The murmurs in the hall deepen into a warm hum, a shared anticipation as the meal draws close. From the kitchen comes the first great platter, a roasted joint of mutton skin, crisped and glistening. It is set carefully at the high table, followed by trenchers piled with baked root vegetables, bowls of pottage thickened with barley and herbs, and a dish of apples baked in their skins, the juices pooling in the hollow of each. Servants carry smaller platters to the lower tables. The same dishes, simpler perhaps, but equally rich in scent and warmth. The air is filled now with the mingled fragrances of meat herbs and fresh bread. Torches flicker in the draught from the opened door as more food is brought in their flames, bowing briefly before straightening again. The first jugs of ale are poured, the sound of liquid splashing into goblets, joining the soft scrape of benches as people shift forward. Bread is torn by hand, its crust crackling faintly. Spoons dip into the steaming pottage. Knives slice into the tender meat. The murmur of conversation swells, warm and steady. There is no rush, the food will last. The night is long. At the high table, the Lord speaks in low tones to a guest on his right. The lady laughs softly at something said by the guest to her left. Down the tables, the talk ranges from the day's work to the small stories of the village, a roof repaired, a calf born the promise of a good harvest if the weather holds. From a quiet corner, the minstrel begins to play. The lute's soft liquid notes weave through the voices, sometimes carrying clearly, sometimes sinking into the background hum. It is not a performance that demands attention, but one that shapes the air, drawing all the separate sounds into a gentle harmony. Now and then, the dogs shift from under the tables, noses lifting at the scent of meat, before settling back into place. A child at the lower end of the hall giggles quietly at something whispered by the man beside him. Someone claps another on the back, their laughter low but warm. The meal stretches on its pace, unhurried. The candles burn steadily, their wax pooling at the base. The fire softens from its early blaze to a strong, steady glow, the logs collapsing into a deep bed of embers. Servants move quietly among the tables, refilling goblets, bringing fresh trenchers where needed, clearing away the empty dishes as the platters empty. When the last course, a small offering of cheese and nuts, has been set out and eaten, the talk lingers. Some rise to step outside into the cooler air of the courtyard. Others stay by the fire, stretching their legs and leaning back on the benches. The hall breathes more slowly now, its work of the day done, its people warmed and fed. The minstrel shifts into a slower tune, letting the notes hang a little longer between each pluck of the string. The light from the candles and the hearth mingles into a single soft glow that paints the stone walls in shades of gold and amber. Beyond the thick doors, the night has deepened fully. The torches along the walls burn brighter now in contrast, their flames bending gently in the night breeze. In the village below, only a handful of lights remain, the last embers in home hearths, the occasional lantern carried from one door to another. Inside, the warmth holds. The voices grow fewer, quieter. A pair of guards speak in low tones at the far end of the hall. Near the hearth, a man bends to toss another log onto the fire, the sparks lifting briefly before sinking back into the glow. The Lord rises, nodding once to the steward, before departing toward the private chambers above. One by one, others follow the scrape of benches marking their leaving. The high table is cleared, the silver salt cellar polished once more before being returned to its chest. Candles are snuffed along the far wall, their wicks curling in small threads of smoke. Only a handful remain those on the night. Watch a servant or two tidying for morning. The minstrel sets his lute aside. The last notes seem to linger even after the strings have stilled. The fire settles into its steady breathing once more, and the hall begins its slow shift toward the quietest hours. The hall is nearly empty now. The last few voices, low and steady, drift from the far end where two guards linger over their mugs. The fire in the central hearth has burned low, its heart a deep bed of embers that shift and glow with each faint stir of air. A servant gathers the last of the wooden trenchers, stacking them neatly before slipping away toward the pantry. The candle flames bend faintly in the quiet drafts that coil through the high space, their light trembling across the stone walls. Outside the heavy doors, the courtyard is wrapped in darkness, broken only by the pools of orange light from the torches along the wall. Their flames sway in the night breeze, the shadows they cast, stretching and bending across the cobbles. The air is cooler now, carrying the smell of damp stone wood smoke and the faint sweetness of hay from the stables. A guard walks slowly past you, the iron tip of his spear tapping lightly against the flagstones with each step. His boots sound soft in the stillness, the rhythm steady but unhurried. Somewhere above, another guard crosses the wall walk, his silhouette black against the faint glow of the sky. The chain on his lantern swings gently as he walks, sending little arcs of light along the parapet. The stable lanterns burn low, their soft light barely reaching the far corners of the stalls. The horses stand in quiet repose, some with heads drooping toward the straw, others shifting their weight with slow, sleepy movements. One horse gives a deep sigh, its breath clouding faintly in the cooler air, before vanishing into the dark. You wander toward the kitchen yard. Most of the activity there has ceased, the doors bolted, the hearths banked for the night. Only one small fire remains tended by a scullion stirring a pot of thin broth for the guards who will take their early